Hello, everyone, and welcome. Lovely to see you. Welcome back to the session on the final session, actually, for CLI's Women Legal Business Founders and Leaders series. This one's on managing partner to founder, how to scale back and preserve legacy. I'm Terry Mottershead. I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and I'm your host today. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands on which we all meet. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. So in this session, we're kind of coming full circle in a way and going to discuss what it's like to move from founding or managing a law firm and kind of what's next when you move on from that role, what's next. But equally, I would say for anyone that's changing careers or thinking about it, a lot of what we're going to speak about today will be relevant as well. There's a lot packed into what's next. So we are going to be unpacking that a little bit at a time and moving through it. We know for sure that it requires lots of reflection, lots of planning and lots of work, as our panelists will tell you today. It's really hard to imagine a better panel to chat about this topic than the folks that are here today. These absolutely amazing women. I'd like to extend a huge welcome to all of you. Kristen Podigal, who's the co-founder of UNIQU, Sarah Ray, the founding partner of Justicia Lawyers and Consultants, and Alison Warburton, the co-founder and the director of Lacuna Professional Solutions. Welcome, everyone. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Terry.
So we've got to start at the beginning on this because your own stories are so rich in terms of having worked through the sorts of things that we're going to discuss today. So I wanted to kick off by asking each of you to share your story, and particularly, the kind of the then, the now and the next, all of those pieces of the continuum and how you have kind of worked through that. And Kristen, you get to kick us off with your story first.
Okay, great. So I was a lawyer for 20 years. I spent a couple of years as the managing partner and CEO of McCullough Robertson, which for those outside Queensland is Queensland's biggest law firm, or was at the time. I then did a stint as the CEO of Women's Legal Service, which runs the statewide domestic violence legal helpline in Queensland. And then about a year and a half ago, I took the leap and left law entirely. So I don't now practice in the law. If you look at the now, as you mentioned, Terry, I'm one of the founders of a charity called UNIQU, which is a tech-enabled career advisory platform. At the moment, we've got a pilot program backed by the Queensland Government into about 30 high schools across Queensland. So we're in the early stages. I would put us in the bootstrapped sort of startup stage. So lots of uncertainty, never enough money, need to be super ambidextrous and do a whole bunch of things that you're by no means an expert in. So pretty much diametrically opposed to what my career in law looked like. But yeah, and it's obviously a charity. So I also sit on a number of different boards and then do some teaching and some strategic consulting and business strategy and collaboration. So a bit of a patchwork, but yeah, I love it. I could probably never have imagined when I was sitting in a law firm how much joy I would have stepping outside law. I certainly live a bigger life than I used to when I was in a law firm. So that's my then and now, at least.
Fantastic. And Alison, how about you? What's your story?
Thank you. Well, I'm a country girl. I was raised on a potato farm on the Darling Downs. So I actually don't think I knew any lawyers when I was a kid, and I certainly didn't know anyone who had the words chief or executive in their job title. And I was, a bit of a sort of booky, nerdy kid. Loved my language, and I aspired to be a journalist. So I was sort of all set to go on a journalism career, but I ended up studying journalism and law, and the law won me over with her quirky ways. So I started my articles at Minter Ellison and ended up there for 26 years and 18 as a partner there. And it was probably, I think, about late 40s where I started to feel like I wanted to do something a bit more. My kids were getting to sort of, the 8, 9, 10 years of age. So I had a little bit of space in my life to think about something a bit different. And there's probably 2 drivers for me for sort of making a change and doing something different. One was I did find it quite difficult to manage the demands of a legal career with motherhood. I felt like, I was being pulled in 100 different ways and my extended family were as well. So I wanted to, make a change for me, but I also wanted to do something for other women in the law as well, because I saw so many women in the same position at the same sort of stage of their lives. So, I wanted to see if I could make some positive changes. So as a result of that, with my business partner, Bronwyn Arden Lewis, who I think is on the call today, we set up a business, Lacuna Professional Solutions, to provide back office business development, administration support for smaller boutique practices. Not all of which are, not all of our clientele are women, but we're supporting people who are doing law in different ways and a bit more flexible careers. And the other driver for me was I really wanted to develop more of my leadership and governance skills, and a bit like Kristen, went into the sort of the board directorship space and have been doing that for a few years now. And that's, you do feel like you're growing again. I feel like I learned as much in the last sort of 6 years as I did in the previous 15. It really does challenge you. So that's kind of the where I am now. The next, well, it's a little way down the track, but I still am that kind of bookie dreamer country kid. So, one day there's a fiction book in there, but it's a little way down the track yet. So, yeah, so that's me. And I would very much echo Kristen's comments that my life now is so much larger than it was before. I love my time in pure law, I'll call it pure law, and it really did give me some wonderful skills to sort of step out and do a whole lot more different things down the track. So, yeah.
I'm seeing some themes emerging here about kind of, the continuous curiosity, I'm going to call it, and also kind of challenging yourself. And I know, Sarah, that definitely applies to you as well. So please share your story.
Thanks, Terry, and hello, everybody. Well, I think I represent the percentage of my university cohort of 30 plus years ago who studied law and had absolutely no clue what lay ahead of me and what options were available after university. So I certainly, through lack of options, really found myself on the traditional pathway, working in 2 large law firms, firstly as a partner and then as a special counsel. And after about 12 years, a colleague and I thought there has to be a better way to both practice law but also balance all our competing interests and priorities. So we set up Justitia, a boutique workplace relations legal practice advising employers. And at the time, we certainly felt we had nothing to lose. We heard a few comments from people about what a brave move that was, but it was, as I mentioned, it was 18 years ago. So we had few role models, and back in those days, there were very few advisors really helping people make that transition into setting up a law firm. There's a plethora of advisors and supports now available, but there weren't back then. So everything was very much trial and error as we sort of slowly sought to grow and develop the firm. And yeah, very excitingly celebrated our 18th birthday this year. But it's not, over that period of time, it's not always a bed of roses. So we had our challenges. One of them was actually having my co-founder at the 10-year mark be offered another opportunity. So she left, and that was personally a really big step, both for her but also for me, in terms of then becoming the solo leader of a legal practice. And whilst it was hard at times, it also possibly was a saving grace. And I think that was one of the reasons why I did step away to set up a practice, which was not just about being a practitioner and practicing my craft as an employment law advisor, but also as running a business and having to master the range of skills necessary to having something that's sustainable and continuous as a business. So that range of challenges has been rejuvenating for me in a sense over the last many years. And what we always had as part of our vision for the firm from our earliest days was to set up something that was different. So we were working flexibly and working part-time long before COVID came along. And we also were really conscious that we wanted to be able to pursue our other interests and have a much more rounded out life. So that enabled us and our people to do other different and interesting things. And in my case, helped me create the time for me to help an American association set up a chapter in Australia for workplace investigators, and also work on a number of boards, which I think we've heard others on this panel have that opportunity to pursue other interests and work on a broader canvas. So where am I at now? Where am I up to in my continuum? So having been a driver of a business for 18 years, I think you do have to keep checking in on yourself about where you're at. And in my case, certainly a couple of years ago, I came to the realisation that I needed to start to think about the future for myself and for the firm, and start a transition with the people around me. So I'm in that process at the moment. And as you and I have discussed, Terry, that doesn't happen overnight. That's something that requires some planning and quite a bit of time. And so it's a work in progress at the moment.
Absolutely. I want to ask you all a little bit about legacy to kind of go to that part, but I wanted to, as I'm listening to you, I would really like to ask you all this question as well. And Sarah, I'm going to start by addressing this one initially to you. Were you conscious, or did you think you were groundbreaking at the time that you have been or are in the process of doing it, perhaps, Kristen, in your situation now? Because all of you have spoken about doing something really different. And I'm just wondering whether that was in your mind when you were doing it, or it was just that you wanted to do this and it's kind of become groundbreaking. Sarah, what do you think about that? What was in your mind when you were doing all that you've just discussed?
Well, on reflection, I wish there had been more in my mind at the time. I think we just took the plunge. As I said, we wanted to try something new. We knew we didn't have much to lose. We could potentially have, stepped back into a more formal career structure and law firm environment. But we thought we had a bit of a risk-taking appetite, and we thought, let's give this a go. And we were modest about that, and we were slow in our build, in a sense. And as I said earlier, there were no advisors around that time. There were no role models as to how you might do this. So I think we both were great supports to each other, and we just slowly took on staff as we felt we had the work available to support more people coming into the practice. And we also had the experience of what we'd seen working in more conservative and more traditional structures. So we knew we didn't want to do that. That was pretty much the only thing that we did know. And then it was about experimenting with new ways of working. And over a long period now, I guess you can say one has acquired lots of knowledge and much more clarity about what works, what are the hard bits, and how you navigate those hard bits. And I guess through different experiences, you learn to adjust and navigate. And then also, if you think you're onto a good thing, then trying to communicate that to others. And so you talked about legacy. It's such a beautiful word. I don't think anyone creates a legacy on their own. I think we create what we do with the help of others. And for me, I hope that the firm is what has the legacy, and I hope I've been a contributor to that. I've been there on a part of that journey, and there'll be others that come along who will be part of it. But in creating the legacy for the firm, it certainly takes open-mindedness, and it takes risk-taking, and it takes finding people with similar values and attracting those into your organisation to help you continue to build and grow that legacy. If I could just say one other thing about that, I said at the beginning that There were no advisors, and then we didn't know what legacy we were looking to create. I think today, if I was giving someone advice in their setup, I think I would ask them to think very carefully about what they wanted their legacy to be and to help inform their strategy about how they want to grow their firms. That's the one bit of advice that I didn't have right at the get-go. As I said, we just thought, let's let it unfold and let's see how we go. But I think you can do these things with intent if you have the right advice and support around you. So hopefully that's useful to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And picking up on that, and Kristen, if I may address this one to you, I'm just wondering, the reason I was throwing in, you know, did you think about it being groundbreaking? Because particularly what you're doing is really different, because sometimes that can be, it may make it more difficult to create legacy in a way, because you've got to get all of those people that Sarah was talking about around you and kind of work through that. So I'm just wondering, I guess, combining those two things is what you're doing now. Particularly, have you thought about that in terms of it being groundbreaking? And to pick up where Sarah kind of ended, have you got the end in mind? Do you know what you're trying to achieve and in that way creating legacy as well?
So yes, we absolutely have the end in mind. So the idea of the service was, you know, if you lived in, you know, a capital city, you could go off to a careers fair, you could access all sorts of mentoring programs. But if you're rural, regional, remote, if you're an Indigenous community, if you were just in an area where you didn't have terribly inspiring people, or like Alison says, you know, you didn't know someone who was already in the sort of job or industry that you were going for, you really had far less opportunity. So it was really looking at how do you even that playing field and looking at the pipeline of women moving into industries where women are underrepresented and going, we don't need, you know, a couple more careers fairs. We need to massively increase the pipeline of women going into these roles. And there's thousands of programs that are around, you know, universities, early stage career professionals going into these areas. There's far less at the high school stage when people are starting to work out that career path. So it was really looking at, well, let's not add something that's already there. Let's not do it in the way that others are already doing it. So it's a fully online model. It was one of the first, as far as we can see, that is that fully online piece. It was at a time where schools were not good at the IT. They got better through the COVID piece, but it's still not seamless. So yeah, it is. And I think, you know, that piece around getting very clear on what you're doing, I think one of the things I've really learned is to get super crystal clear on what is that impact that you are trying to drive, and we call it the bright line. So what's that bright line that you're not going to cross? Because the reality is of being in a startup, as I'd class us, almost everything else other than the bright line will change, be compromised, done differently, and you do a lot of failing and learning. That's the nature of the beast. And I should say that doesn't come naturally to someone with a legal background or legal training. Lawyers don't love failing. So that's been, as I say, personally, a really good development for me of just sort of that constant testing and learning piece. But yeah, getting really super clear has been really important. And yes, we think we are groundbreaking. People say there's lots of, you know, STEM programs out there, those sorts of things, but it's we have intentionally tried to create something to do quite a step change in what's doing. The ultimate plan is that one day this will be federal. We're moving into other states at the moment, so all fingers crossed. It's as I say, not without its challenges, as any startup is. So.
Thank you for that. And Alison, I want to kind of combine these questions for you as well. And, you know, to pick up where Kristen was talking about being a startup, I mean, can you almost iterate and create a legacy at the same time? And is that a natural part of being a startup? I mean, how did that work for you with Lacuna?
Yeah, you can. And I was laughing and smiling to myself as Kristen was sort of talking about the getting comfortable with failing, because it is such not a lawyer mindset. You know, it's beaten out of us. And I think even by nature, it's the sort of people who self-select for law. So getting yourself comfortable with that, putting yourself out there, trying multiple things, and some of them work, some of them don't, is a really different skill set and quite a confronting one to sort of get back up and have another go, because that's what you do. And so absolutely, I would also agree with the bright line analogy. I mean, for us with Lacuna, I guess the legacy was more sort of attitudinal, experiential. What we wanted was for things to be easier and better for the women who came after us. We wanted some of the challenges that we had met and overcome to be, known, because we didn't even know them before we hit them as young lawyers. A bit like Sarah said, you sort of didn't really know what you're in for at the start of your career. So that, for us, that was what the legacy was about, making things better for the people who would come after us, sharing our knowledge, experiences, knockbacks or difficulties. Everyone will have them. And sometimes it's just someone else who's a little bit further along to go, yeah, these things do happen, but you'll pull yourself up and you'll go forward, and it will be fine in a couple of years. So for us, that's what legacy was about. We had very similar experiences of the redefining with Lacuna. We've refined our services quite a lot from where we thought they would be initially, despite the fact that we did go out and do an awful lot of market testing, and we had to do some regulatory analysis to make sure we weren't tripping over any regulatory hurdles, because law is highly regulated. So we did a lot of that at the outset before we started, but even so, we really refined the service to meet what the market wanted. And that, for startups, is a very typical sort of startup story, that iterative process.
Thank you for that. I wanted to move into the next question, and this is one I think that gets a lot of airtime. But I don't know that you necessarily always get to the nitty-gritty of it. So I want to get to the nitty-gritty of this one, which is about building a runway. You've often heard that when folks want to make a change, and I'm not talking about retirement, although that may be one of the changes that you make, that you need to start planning for it many, many years in advance. The old timeline that used to get thrown around was kind of 5 years. So I can't imagine it could be 5 years now with the pace of change, but there's probably something about getting prepared for what comes next. And so I just wanted to unpack that a little bit, because, when you're talking about that, it is professional for sure, but it's personal. There's a lot of people that you've got contact with that are outside your business realm, obviously, that are really, really important and a part of all of this as well. So, Alison, I wanted to start with kind of pulling this one apart with you, if I may. What is this runway? Is it a time thing? Is it a structure thing? Is it an investigation thing? How do you define it?
It's all of those. For me, it's a mindset. It's a skill set, and it's a commitment to actually start to take action. Because if you don't do that, the runway's there gleaming in front of you, but you're still there revving the engines and nothing happens. So, I think it probably is still about 5 years, to be honest. I think for someone who has been in, a pure law kind of environment, it really depends on what you have done previously. But for me, the point of building a runway is broadening the skills that you've got and the connections that you've got, so that you can move yourself from the thing you're doing now to the new thing that you think you might like to be doing. And so you don't just sort of wake up one day and get to do that. Sometimes people do. They get a tap on the shoulder and there is an opportunity there. But in sort of the job markets of today, they're all about your skill sets, and law, whilst a great skill, is a relatively narrow one. So if you think you want to move into something other than that, you do have to have a look at how you're going to acquire some of those additional skill sets, whether they be leadership, whether they be policy, whatever it might be that you think might be the skill sets that are required for the change. So you're looking at sort of some parallel opportunities with what you're doing now, which means you get busier for a period while you're building that runway, while you acquire those. And the same with connections. Again, with lawyers, we have limited time, so we tend to, focus our connections into work generation or, work provision. We don't tend to mix with a group of people outside of law who might be the people that we need to mix with to provide those other opportunities. So you need to have a think about it in that sense as well. What are the different group of people that you need to make connections with? And then you really do need to take action. I say to people, you need to do at least one thing. I think Kristen or Sarah would say multiple things, but you need to do at least one thing per year, which is just for your CV, not for the CV of the person that you work with or the firm that you're in. Just something that's for you, that makes you more marketable, more desirable, stand out against, other people that you are up against. And in the current sort of employment market, that is really important. You will not make it through the first set of hurdles if you don't have that sort of broader skill set to even get to interview stage for something a bit different. So that's sort of a broad picture of the runway, but then at the point you've really got to commit and, take off.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, I wanted to actually come to you next on this one as well, because to pick up on a point that Alison made, I know that you've said in the past, I'm now going to cite you back to yourself, and you've kind of said that you need to do a thing for yourself every week. So Alison, you've got doing something for yourself on a regular basis. Sarah, you've got doing something for yourself every week. So tell us a little bit about that in the context of this runway discussion.
Well, I think based on a word that Alison used, I think it is about mindset, and I would encourage all lawyers to have a broad mindset about the work that they do, and yes, legal advisory is what we primarily do, but there's so many other things that we can do in our lives and should ideally make space for. And I've certainly been in that mindset for a very long time, and setting up a Justitia was to enable me to pursue those other interests at the same time. But as well, and I know we're talking about, building the runway, I do think you have to keep asking yourself, do you have fuel in the tank? And for me, I was always anticipating, might there be a day that I don't have fuel in the tank, irrespective of all the many things that I might be doing and juggling. And I don't want to be in a place where I haven't planned for that. So looking into the future for that day where the fuel might have run out, I've been building that runway, I guess, for many years now. And part of that has been pursuing these other interests, just really to create balance as well in my life. I think, it's good to have lots of variety of interests, not just being a straight advisor. So working for another association, working on boards, but at the same time as well, building the runway, which is, am I going to be around forever doing what I'm doing right now? The answer is no. We heard that it could take up to 5 years. I think it very much depends on the nature of the organisation and yourself as to how long it does take. And some people might need a lot longer. For me now, I've been, thinking about the future for 4 years, and working out how the firm will be were I not to be there at some point, and building the infrastructure in a way and looking that it's there so that we'll continue to be sustainable. And in doing that, of course, there are curveballs that one does not plan for, which will be familiar to some of the listeners. The pandemic obviously was not planned for. Key people can leave your practice. You can go through, economic downturns and upturns. You can find that when you're looking to the future and planning for creating your runway, that you need to have people in your practice that actually can step in and take over your role and responsibilities. So all of those things do take time. Are best not to be rushed, and they're the things that I've been thinking about and working on over several years, including using the wonderful services of Lacuna in that time as well. Talking to other colleagues, bringing together trusted advisors to help me in my decision making and my planning. So I know that that's something that you wanted to touch on, Terry, in terms of how we go how we plan for our futures and transition, and what you mean by the runway, I think, is the runway into taking flight into possibly the next life and steps that one might take outside of one's firm.
Absolutely, yes, and hold that thought, because I do want to do a bit of a deep
that a bit
dive
more.
into that. Yeah. Kristen, I've heard you say, and in conversations that we've had on this point, on this runway point, just the importance of taking time to reflect, to think about what you want to do next. And I guess we often panic about that, don't we? It's kind of like, no, we can't do that. And we're used to kind of, we've got to go from this to the next thing to the next thing. How important is that aspect of this runway as well?
Yeah, for me, that was critically important. I look at it and think, had I really developed the runway when I made the jump out of the law side of things? And on one hand, no, I hadn't. But then I listened to Alison and I think, well, I had a natural curiosity. I had been building, a mindset around, just general curiosity and a whole bunch of things that were outside law. So yes, there was, in that sense, some runway, but I sort of took the leap not knowing necessarily what I was going to go to. And for me, that was, part terrifying, part very exciting to actually sit there and look at it. And I think, I don't know if it's a lawyer tendency or just a but there was very much that tendency to want to relieve the tension and lock something down quickly and jump at the first or second or third thing that came along. And I really had to school myself to spend that time, working out what it was. I had spent 20 years in a single firm. I hadn't moved around a lot. So I really then did a fact gathering sort of exercise where I really did get out there, and I think, as Alison mentioned too, sort of really got outside my own bubble, expanded who I was talking to, bouncing ideas off, that sort of thing. And that was really important. What else was out there? What sort of opportunities were out there? And it was in that sort of phase that, I connected up with the other people behind Unique You, for example. It's not that I, intentionally thought I was going out to help create that, for example. So I think that was really quite important. And I probably look at it a bit from the data gathering sense, that sort of you have one, if you're just looking at just your own ideas, then you have one data point, but the broader that you go in terms of talking to people, the more data points you gather. On the other hand, there's also, and I think the more data points you have, the better decision that you make. That's all the statistics around, collaboration and the work of Heidi Gardner and that sort of piece all says that, the broader the inputs that you have coming into these decisions, so much the better decisions you're likely to make. But there is also balancing the point of, at some point, I might endlessly research, I might endlessly data gather, I might endlessly talk to people. All of that might make me feel like what I've come up is safe and secure and never going to fail. But the fact of the matter is, that's a bit of a mirage. At some point, you do have to commit to making a decision about something. So I think some of the best advice I was given was set yourself a time frame for how long that data gathering, percolating stage is, but set a time frame so that you're not in it endlessly, and you set a time frame, and at the end of that, you make your best guess at what you're moving forward for. So I think that worked, because I think it's the lawyer training. I also think it's the people who go into law, but there is a point where that perfectionist tendency is absolutely the enemy, and if you're going to do something that has impact, then it's ultimately about the doing, not the planning, and you'll learn more by the doing than you will from the planning. So
yeah, absolutely. Let me jump to the next bit, which is I think this is probably one of the hardest bits, actually, which is knowing when it's time to move on. And for some people, I imagine that might come as an aha moment. For others, there's little kind of red flags or little goalposts along the line that you see. And I guess the other part of that is, you know, being very real about this, there are financial considerations here. There's a certain comfort or almost complacency, perhaps, the golden handcuffs, as we call them, that tie you to what you're doing now, even if you feel driven to do something else. So I wanted to ask this question of all of you, and Alison, come to you first on this one, if I may. Do you look for the revelation, you know, the aha moment, and who do you, and Sarah's touched on this already, but who do you gather around you, and Kristen, I think you did too, to help you be that reality check about what you're doing, but also at the same time kind of overcome the fear factor of maybe it is leaping with no safety net? How do you know when it's time? What are those bits that manifest themselves? Big question.
Yeah.
No.
There's so much in all of that. I mean, there are risks. So law is a fairly secure career, financially rewarding, and, you know, fairly job secure. So there are risks when you go out and do something else, and you do have to look at it objectively. You need to look at where am I at in my position in life in terms of, you know, people who depend on me. What are my financial circumstances? You know, how much insecurity can I weather? So those are all really good, important considerations if you're thinking about making a move. If for whatever reason you do find yourself where you can't make the move right now because of ties, but you aren't terribly happy with what you are doing, I will give you a piece of advice from Nigella Lawson, which was, if you can't change your circumstances, change your mindset.
Yeah.
And it sounds hard, but it is absolutely doable. And I think in terms of the, you know, how do you know it's time to leave? You always want to be a net benefit to the organisation that you are involved in. If ultimately your interaction or contribution to that organisation is, you know, on the negative balance, then it is time to do one of two things: either change how you are interfacing with the organisation or move on from the organisation. So I think it's as pretty simple as that, and I think most people actually know the truth of that when they get out of bed in the morning. I think you know how that really is for you. It's not too hard. So again, you know, it is all about the mindset, but there's various options open to you with your decision making. If you're going to make the move, you do have to understand that nothing will be certain. I mean, Kristen is so right. We lawyers, we do love to plan, but I can say from my personal experience, because I always thought I was quite a change averse person until I started making changes. And then it turns out, no, I love it. And I keep making more changes. So that was a very...
Yeah, you're not, okay.
I know, but such a late career shock revelation to myself. So, and it's been an utter delight, you know, expanding the circle of people that I interact with, doing things like this, you know, meeting you, Terry, and the group of people that you've introduced Bronwyn and I to, has been just such a delight in sort of the later part of our careers, and seeing this whole other community and getting to do all these different things that we haven't got to do in our careers until now. So, you know, there are those trades as well of the bigger, broader, more interesting horizons that probably your 18-year-old you hoped for. You get to do that.
Yeah, which is fantastic. I mean, it's just a lovely story. Sarah, let me go to you next. What about you? How do you know when it's time to do something different, whether it's moving on or not?
Well, I think Alison has captured all the key features of the decision making. And when you're working in a business and you're either a founder or fairly key to that business, then your planning needs to be a little bit more careful, because the implications are significant, not just for yourself, but for other people. So I mentioned before that for me, I was not necessarily feeling that there was no fuel in the tank, but I was anticipating when that day might happen and not wanting to be caught unprepared, and working towards that. And also an element of, you know, you can spend a lot of time being a leader, but sometimes it's useful to think about, well, are there other people that might do aspects of that or all of that better than you? And also, when is it time to move aside and let others step up and take the lead? So with all of those things in mind, and also noticing, I suppose, and I'm sure this is common to many, you know, the burnout factors for individuals, which might be, you know, a little bit more exasperated with a client who's not done something the way that they should have or could have avoided a problem, or, you know, get a bit impatient with colleagues, a bit more cynical about the world. When you start to know that you're not responding professionally to every encounter, or you're feeling a little bit less tolerant, then I think they're all little warning signs that you need to re-examine what you're doing and whether you're flourishing, and if not, you know, try and unpack that. So there's no question some of those features, you know, were a little bit in my influencing me in my personal journey, and so then it was about bringing in the advisors and starting to talk to people more broadly about how, if I'm looking at transition, what does that look like, and how do I manage that? And certainly having a good council of friends and having good advisors, you know, helps you along the way. You can't do it on your own, and you do need support, and you shouldn't rush it. So taking some time to do that.
And I guess being comfortable with that, with again, going back to something that we've touched on already, but not feeling that it has to be a decision that you make tomorrow, you know, to give yourself permission almost to take the time that you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Kristen, what about you? How do you know, how did you know that it was time for a change?
Well, just to go to completely counter to what you just said, Terry, but for me, there was absolutely an aha moment. I could tell you the time on the clock and the particular date.
Wow.
And it was, and look, it was really a situation where I probably realised for the first time that I was out of sync with a bunch of my colleagues on a fairly critical point. It was something that went to my core values and something that I held pretty close, and I was it was really like, I pride myself on being pretty down to earth and pretty authentic, and it was one of those sorts of things that once you see that, you can't not act on it. You know, the firm deserved better, I deserved better. You know, once you've identified that bit of being out of sync, it's, you know, I think it is incumbent on you to you know, to take the leap in that situation. So I think for me, there was very much an aha moment. If I, you know, the benefit of, you know, having spent a bit of time thinking about it post that, then there probably were some signs on the way through, but at the time it surprised me. I remember ringing my parents saying, "You'll never guess what I did this morning." And they did not guess. So, and neither did my husband. So, you know, it was a surprise to those around me. So yeah, it is interesting. As I say, if I look back now with the benefit of hindsight, I can probably see a few different things. And, you know, as much as I think Alison and Sarah just sort of talked about some of the, you know, the indicia that are maybe on the more negative side, if I flip it to and look on the more positive side, I could probably point to, I was getting more and more interested in things that went beyond the role, the organisation, the industry. And if I look at it, it's like, oh, actually, this has been a wave that's been building for some time. It's just hit a sandbar at this point, so it looks like it's crashed, you know, and hit pretty quickly. But the reality is actually, you know, it's been this building interest and fascination with a whole bunch of things that went beyond, you know, what I'd class as the typical legal remit. So that's how it was for me.
A slow burn to realisation, almost, in a way.
Slow burn to a quick decision. So.
Exactly right. Let me wrap our part of the discussion up anyway, with one final question to you, and perhaps it is the question that's on the minds of the folks that are with us today. And it's, where do you start? So you've now all got the benefit of hindsight. And the benefit of kind of knowing what worked and maybe what didn't. But where do you start? So we're sitting here today. I think that, you know, something I really want to do is make sure that I can move from one role to another. What's the first thing I do now when I push end on this meeting? And I'm going to address that one to you first, Kristen.
I think, Terry, I was just talking about sort of the benefit of hindsight. I first came across what is my now favourite quote a couple of years ago, and it's a quote by the poet Mary Oliver, and it's, you know, what do you plan to do with this one wild and precious life? And if I actually look at that, that really encapsulates it for me. It is about taking a breath and taking a step back and getting really deliberate about what it is, you know, you're going to do with your life, what will be your legacy, what are you creating, and also recognizing, and this one took me a little while to, you know, work through and embrace, but that the path for you might be entirely different from the path of the person or the colleague sitting next to you, and that can feel pretty uncomfortable, particularly where you've, you know, grown up in a situation where you move up a ladder and it's this step and then there's the next step and then the following step, you know, to actually say, you know what, it's you know, that's not the path for me anymore. I think that can feel pretty uncomfortable, but I think there is a wild and precious power in that piece, and being really honest with yourself around what that looks like for you. So I think, I mean, certainly for me, I haven't regretted any of the opportunities, or I've regretted opportunities I haven't taken up, but I certainly haven't regretted any of the mistakes that I've made, and I've made a few. So I think that is probably it in a nutshell for me. It's really about, yes, think about it for a period of time, take that breath, you know, assess things and do it on a personal level, not what you think you should do or what you're told you should do or all those sorts of things. You know, you owe it to yourself to actually look at what you want to create from your life, but then actually have a go and get out there and don't die wondering, I guess.
Yeah. And then what you want is probably going to be really different from what 18-year-old you wanted, right?
Absolutely.
Because you've grown so much as a person.
And if it's not, it probably should be. You want to question yourself why it isn't.
That's a highlight. That's at the top of the priority list. Yeah. So, Alison, how about you? What are your parting words of wisdom, I guess, for folks? Where do you start on all of that?
Oh, well, I'm actually going to start by commenting. When I was 18, my grand desire, if I wasn't a journalist or a florist, was to run a B&B, but I no longer have that grand desire. So, look, the parting words are probably, for many lawyers, and I do meet many lawyers who are unhappy in their later careers, which is, you know, a sad thing. What I would like to say to them is it's okay to want something different. And it's, again, probably following on what people have said before, you don't have to want the same thing as the person in the office next to you. It's okay to want something different just because that's what you want or because that's what fits with your life circumstances. It doesn't mean that you have failed at what you're doing or you're no good at what you're doing. So it's almost that sort of boost of confidence, that acceptance of, well, good on me because I want to go and do something different and big. So that's kind of one first hurdle to get over, is that it's all right to want this. And the second, probably building a bit on what Sarah has said in terms of her sort of hindsight, is you'll tend to go into it a little bit organically and take little tiny steps and safe decisions, and that's okay because we're lawyers. But if you compare yourself to what, you know, other startups do or what other people might do, they often go a whole lot bigger and bolder and take on a lot more risk. And they do that by employing more people, getting more advisors, getting some capital in, if you're thinking about doing a startup venture, for example. So just don't default to the tiny steps or organic. That can be fine. But do talk to some people who've done the big things and taken a bit more risk, just to see if maybe that's for you as well. Because I think around this conference call, we've all been quite organic with it, but we're now involved in organisations where we've seen different ways of taking it forward, which are, you know, quite bolder and faster. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really
I
good
know-
point, Alison.
Yeah. And I know in my professional career, I've spent an enormous amount of time trying to work out why I always felt like a square peg in a round hole. And then I finally worked it out, right? It was because it was that creativity and innovation and thinking differently that was just so fundamental to, you know, to what I like to do in my being. Sarah, I want to kind of, we've got a couple of questions that I want to come to as well, but I'll finish this kind of question with you, if I may. And again, it's the same one. People listening today, where do they start with all of this?
Well, I think Alison's advice is the best, which is getting people to ask that question as early as possible, either in their current careers or with respect to something that they might set up, which is, what do I want my legacy to be, and to work towards that and think more broadly about how quickly that might be achieved. I think it's useful for people to sit down and write out what their values are. I think most people don't think about that very much, but it's a really useful exercise. And the third bit of advice is something that has come to me in more recent times, which is, I think, reaching out to a trusted circle of friends and set up your own little personal board. Might be 3 people, it could be more, and put before that group your ideas and your questions about how you're going to map out your next steps, whatever they might be and however quick they might be, and seek their counsel and advice over a period of time. You might not get the answers in the first meeting. You might need to go away and do some reflecting. But I think sometimes going to people that have known you for a long time, they actually see things that you don't see. And collectively, there might be some decision making and some planning that can be really useful in advising and giving confidence to decision making. And certainly, I think I alluded to a council of friends before. That's been helpful to me over time to support me in decisions that I've had to make. So that's a bit of advice. It doesn't cost any money. And, you know, you want some black hats in that group as well who are going to ask the hard questions. But I think that can be a really useful exercise, even if you're not trying to do something immediately, but maybe thinking about the future.
Yeah, fabulous advice from all of you. Let me pick up on a couple of questions that we've got here, and they're great ones. Do you still suffer from imposter syndrome, and how do you overcome this? So, Kristen, I'm going to address this one to you first, because I know that you've done some stuff on social media about this quite recently. So let's start with you.
In relation to this event.
In relation to this event,
yeah,
yeah.
Hilariously, I'd never thought of myself as an entrepreneur until you reached out to me, Terry. I'm like, oh, really? So, you know, if that's not an example that I'm still, you know, working through imposter syndrome, then there you go. Yeah, I heard a fabulous reframe of this, the concept of imposter syndrome more recently, and I wish I'd learned it much earlier, which is, you know, part of why we feel imposter syndrome is because we are doing things outside our comfort zone. We are stretching, we are growing, we are failing, we are learning. And if you just sat there on the safe path, you don't get imposter syndrome on the safe path, because you're not in that growth piece. And I really like the concept of, you know, there's a reason why they call it growing pains. It's because it hurts. You know, and I have small children, and, you know, it's been a really good reminder for me of, you know, you don't run before you walk or you crawl or those sorts of things. It's and that imposter syndrome piece, I think I now really try and use that reframe, because I do still feel it. Absolutely. I sit on some boards where I'm the only person who has less than 2 doctorates and I don't have any, you know, those sorts of things. Like, you know, working with fabulous people, I am always learning. And yet it's the piece of going, you know, is this imposter syndrome, or is this actually just an indication that I'm surrounding myself with excellent people, that I'm doing things that are, you know, hard and I'm learning from and that sort of thing, as opposed to, oh, I shouldn't be here. It's actually saying, no, I'm continuing to grow and learn. And my dad was a teacher, and he always talked about, you know, you must continue to learn every day for your whole life. And I do really believe that. And I think imposter syndrome is not a bad thing, in that it's really just a reminder that you are doing tough stuff, and sometimes it feels difficult. And Sarah talks about, getting your circle of support and friends around you. I think that's incredibly important. So yes, I still suffer from it, but I'm working on it.
You're a work in progress, right?
I'm an absolute work in progress.
As we all are. I wanted to pick up the second question, but feel free also to add any thoughts on the first one. And Sarah, I wanted to address this one to you. Looking back, would you change anything? Did you change anything in your career so far? That's a big question.
I think going back to what Alison talked about having available to you the advice as to, depending on what you're looking to set out to achieve, are there ways to achieve it more quickly rather than the organic build over time? So, and I think I also identified that advice wasn't really readily available in those early days. I think it's an entirely different landscape now, which is fantastic. So if there was anything that I would change, I guess it would be having broader advice about different ways to build a practice more quickly and over a shorter period of time, ultimately.
I'm going to ask you all this question. So Alison, I'm coming to you next. Would you change anything?
Oh, that is such a tough question.
I don't know. They're not all easy here. We'll save some hard ones to the end.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd change anything, but I certainly could have done with some more knowledge. And it again, I sort of will hark back to the fact, country kid, didn't know a lot about law or about business at all when I started. And interestingly, this is a bit of an aside, but back to the imposter syndrome question as well. My business partner and I, Bronwyn, often talk about this. We were both country kids, and we haven't tended to have it, which we attribute to that sort of country upbringing where there weren't really any boundaries. You had to, if stuff had to be done, you had to do it. There was no one else to do it for you. You just sort of got on with it. And it was sort of a very egalitarian kind of community as well. So we often wonder whether that has sort of helped us in many ways. There was an expectation that, whatever you wanted to do, it was up to you to do it. So you just got on with it. And that was it. But probably knowledge, and that's why a lot of what Bron and I are about is this knowledge sharing. The knowledge at the start of your career about the business of law and how to manage a career, how to look after your career, parent it, protect it, develop it, picture where you might want to be in 10 years' time or 20 years' time rather than it just happening to you, because I felt at least the first sort of 15 years just happened to me, and mostly it was good fortune, the things that did happen. But then having kids, I had no idea what a change that would make to career, not opportunities in the sense of it shut down opportunities, but it limited my time. There's absolutely no doubt about that. It limited the time available to pursue opportunities. So again, that sort of knowledge about how to manage that. So for me, it's not so much of changing things, but I certainly could have done with sort of the older advisor giving me, a few more tips about life skills, I suspect, along the way.
Absolutely. Kristen, we started with you and we're going to end with you. The last word on this one is yours. Anything you'd change? And I'm going to say anything you changed so far, because it's not over for any of you. So, yeah.
Honestly, no, because I don't think I would be where I am, which is a spot that I'm very happy to be, if I hadn't made the mistakes that I had made. So, no, honestly, not. I mean, I do agree with what Alison says around, could I have learnt some things faster? Yes, but some of it I had to learn by getting it wrong. There's no lesson you learn better than one that you've personally experienced. So I think for me, no, I generally don't believe in regrets. I think that you create your own path, and part of getting to where you get to is is the choices you make along the way. I spoke at something a couple of weeks ago and talked about the concept of a career being choose your own adventure, which is those books from the 1980s where you each couple of pages you picked which option you were going to go with, and that dictated where you got to. And I do really believe in that piece, which is your career is a culmination of all the choices that you make, and it is a living, breathing thing, and it's not at any point too late to make the brave move, and choose a different path. So no, I don't regret it. I don't think I would have got here without the mistakes, of which there were many.
And long may you all live and breathe, by the way. It's an amazing session. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to have folks such as yourselves who are so willing to be so candid and so honest with your journeys. And I know that it will add a huge amount for those that are listening now and those that pick this up in video and podcast lands as well. So thank you very, very much, Alison, Kristen and Sarah. It's just been an absolute pleasure to spend the time with you. I know for folks that are listening that all of these folks can be found at the very least on LinkedIn, in very many other places, I hasten to add. And so if you do have questions afterwards, I also know that they are wonderful people and that they will respond. So do reach out if you have questions from this. There's a lot in this, and it may take a little time to reflect and you want to ask the questions later. You'll also find us at the centre, obviously, on social media as well. So do please stay in contact with us as well. Thanks very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you again to our wonderful panellists. Look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye now.